Introduction to permits. This video is designed to assist viewers understand air quality permitting for industry and commercial activity. In Kansas, the KDHE Bureau of Air is the authority that monitors, regulates, and permits air emission sources and activities through the state's EPA-approved State Implementation Plan, or SIP, and through adoption of some federal air quality rules and interpretations. Resources on regulations, permitting, emission inventory, monitoring, planning, and public notices for permits, regulations, and other actions can be found on their webpage. The videos, Introduction to Air Pollutants and Introduction to PTE, discuss the criteria pollutants, VOCs, and HAPs that are the regulated pollutants, and defines potential to emit, or PTE, and how to calculate PTE. In this video, we will discuss the threshold emission levels for determining the types of permits needed to be obtained from KDHE Bureau of Air for your operations. In Kansas, there are two basic air permitting programs: construction and operating. Before a company installs any air polluting emission units or activities, or makes any changes to an existing facility, the company is required to calculate the PTE that will result from the new installation or modified operations, and obtain the appropriate documents from KDHE Bureau of Air if indicated. It is easiest to think of these documents as pre-construction documents. When we use the word construction, we look to how the word is defined in KAR 2819-200P, and it means any physical change or change in the method of operation, including fabrication, erection, installation, demolition, or modification of an emissions unit. These activities include, but are not limited to, installation of building supports and foundations, laying underground pipework, and construction of permanent storage structures. With respect to a change in the method of operation, this term refers to those on-site activities other than preparatory activities which mark the initiation of the change. Owners and operators should plan in advance the need for a permit or an approval, and allow plenty of time to submit the appropriate application to KDHE Bureau of Air before beginning any construction activities. In Kansas, we have several types of air quality construction documents. These include general construction approvals and permits, permits for sources needing a prevention of significant deterioration, or PSD permit, expedited permits for concrete batch plants, animal incinerators, oil and gas extraction, portable and stationary rock crushers, as well as expedited approval for emergency generators. As we've discussed, the PTE of the equipment or process determines the type of construction document that you will need. These tables identify the PTE emission thresholds for construction approval or construction permit as outlined by the Kansas Air Quality Regulations. If the PTE of your new or modified equipment or process does not trigger approval or permit thresholds, but the equipment or process is subject to certain federal regulations called New Source Performance Standards, or NSPS, from 40 CFR Part 60, or National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants called NESHAPs, or also known as MACT standards, from 40 CFR Part 63 or 40 CFR Part 61, you will be required to obtain an approval prior to commencing any construction. Operating permits. Once you have construction approvals or permits for your facility operations, you may also need to obtain an operating permit from KDHE Bureau of Air that covers your facility-wide emission activities and processes. The key to understanding if your facility will need an operating permit is understanding the definition of major source of air pollution. Major source means any stationary source or group of stationary sources that are located on one or more contiguous or adjacent properties and are under common control of the same person or persons and have a single major industrial grouping. Sources directly emitting or having the potential to emit HAP emissions greater than or equal to 10 tons per year for a single HAP, or greater than or equal to 25 tons per year for a combination of HAPs are major sources. Sources directly emitting or having the potential to emit greater than or equal to 100 tons per year of any air pollutant, including fugitive emissions from federally designated fugitive emission sources, are also major sources. This table lists the current regulated air pollutants and the major source thresholds for those pollutants: SO2 and SO3, NOx, CO, VOC, lead, PM2.5, and PM10 all have a major source threshold of 100 tons per year. As we said earlier, single HAP threshold is 10 tons per year, and a combination of HAPs has a threshold of 25 tons per year. The facility-wide PTE, not actual or controlled emissions, are used to determine if a source is a major source under Kansas's operating permit program. In this chart example, we can see that the facility has major source PTE for NOx, CO, PM10, VOC, as well as for a single HAP, toluene, and combinations of HAPs. In this chart, the facility's actual VOC emissions are at 102 tons per year. Therefore, on an actual emission basis, as well as the PTE, the source is major for VOCs. There are several types of operating permits in Kansas. All operating permits are for sources that are major sources of air pollution. At the time of the making of this video, Kansas does not have an operating permit program for sources that are considered to be true minor sources, which are sources whose potential to emit is less than major source thresholds that we have reviewed in the previous slides. The rare exception to this would be a minor source subject to a federal rule which requires any source subject to that rule to obtain a Part 70 or Part 71 permit. In Kansas, for sources whose PTE and actual emissions are above major source threshold levels, or sources in the rare exception just discussed, the facility will need to obtain a Class 1 operating permit, also known as a Title V permit. This permit contains all of the applicable emission limits, monitoring, performance testing, record keeping, and reporting requirements the facility must follow, and has a renewal period of every 5 years, unless a modification of the facility's operations has occurred, which would result in the need to modify the operating permit sooner than 5 years. Class 2 operating permits are for sources whose PTE is major, but whose actual emissions fall below major source levels. Actual emissions may be below major source levels for various reasons, such as air emission control devices, restrictions on operations, hours of operation, or a bottleneck in a process. Without the restrictions or the air pollution controls, the facility would be a major source needing a Class 1 operating permit. But with restrictions, the source can have a Class 2 operating permit because its actual emissions are below the major source thresholds. The Class 2 operating permits do not expire, but may need modified based on changes at a facility over time. When applying for construction or operating permit documents in Kansas, there are guidance documents available on the K-State Small Business Environmental Assistance Program website, as well as the KDHE Bureau of Air website. All applications for air quality construction documents or operating permits must be submitted online through the Kansas Environmental Information Management System, or KEMS. When submitting an application on KEMS, you will need to know what type of permit you need and have the information you need to submit as part of the permit application ready to upload into KEMS. Examples of information you will need to provide in KEMS as part of a permit application include a cover letter describing facility operations and the project, SIC and NAICS codes for primary operations, manufacturer or engineering documents for equipment being installed or modified, PTE calculations in a reviewable format, safety data sheets for all chemicals or raw materials used, fuel specification sheets for combustion devices, a plant diagram, and equipment descriptions for all equipment being installed, removed, or reconstructed. This could include manufacturer names, dates, and maximum ratings or throughputs. As stated earlier, KDHE does not have an operating permit for true minor sources. If you are a true minor, meaning your PTE is not above major source levels, and if you are not subject to a federal regulation requiring you to obtain an operating permit, you will follow the requirements of any and all construction approvals or permits that you have received over the years for your operations. Remember, there is always a possibility that someone before you did not obtain the appropriate permits for the facility. So obtaining and maintaining copies of all construction approvals and permits that have been issued in the past is critical. And these should be used to evaluate alongside your current operations to assure everything has been accounted for previously. Additionally, as discussed in another video, knowing your facility-wide potential to emit as well as actual emissions is one of the most critical aspects of complying with ambient air quality regulations, as well as understanding how Kansas and federal air quality rules apply to your operations and facility. For assistance identifying your air emissions and applying for a permit, K-State Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, or SBEP, provides free and confidential technical assistance for small businesses in Kansas. If you are a small business in another state, please contact your state SBEP. Additional information can be found on the National SBEP website.